Hello. Is it Manon?
It's
Sorry.
man. That's right. That's all right.
Manon?
Yeah, that's right. How are you,
Okay,
Peggy?
perfect. Good. Yourself?
Good, good. I wanted to come to the previous session, like yesterday's session, but I had a shoot, so I couldn't do it. But I'm happy
Oh,
to be
no worries. Yeah, excited to have you join us today.
awesome.
Okay, so we're just gonna dive right in. Um, so welcome to day two, and yeah, very excited to have you all joining me today for day two, where we'll unpack more about empathize. Um, Yesterday, we learned that finding product market fit is critical to the success of a product, and achieving product market fit means we'll be on the pathway to building something meaningful and valuable that demonstrates clear profitability and rapid growth. In order to achieve product market fit, we need to be building with a user-centered approach and mindset, which is what we talked about yesterday, thinking from a customer-driven perspective. Aside from just thinking about what our solution is going to be, we need to be thinking about what our user needs in order to ensure our solution actually provides value to the people we are serving. So today we will speak more about how we can ensure value is ingrained in every part of our product development process. Okay, so just a quick overview on our week. Day two is the second aspect of crafting a winning MVP. We learned yesterday we need to frame the solution using a customer-driven approach. But how do you do that? And how can you build with a user-centered approach? You need to practice empathy and look at your end user with an empathetic lens. So you might ask, why is empathy important? In order to have a clear vision on what value you can deliver with your product, you need to first learn to empathize with the end user. You need to learn everything that is important to them, what are their motivations, what are their goals, what is hindering them from achieving their goals, what does the current process or experience look like for them currently. You can only unpack these through actually talking to them. Sometimes they may not even know what exactly they wanted. That's quite common in a startup environment. That's why it's equally important to run experiments on the potential users you are talking to. We will unpack more about this on Thursday, where we'll dive deeper on gaining validated learning. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Anyhow, there are several ways you can learn about your potential user, whether through quantitative or qualitative methods. The key lesson here is that customers are only buying the value of a service, not any particular product. There are so many products out there. Why would they choose yours over others? Only when they can clearly see the value of something, or when they feel like your product is speaking directly to them of how it can actually help them, then they won't even need to be convinced to choose your product. It becomes an immediate choice. Sometimes when we get tied down to a solution, we lose sight of how it's actually going to solve a problem for a real user. Is it actually addressing a need? Is it addressing a need that the current market lacks? A main reason to adopt a user-centered framework is that we're always putting the end user's goal at the forefront. We're talking to them and thinking of what will benefit them the most. You won't be able to define the core value of your product if you aren't communicating and thinking about your end user. And once you do, potential user will see that, and that validated improves your product market fit. So Bill Boxton, a partner researcher at Microsoft, actually says this: the best products are born from a deep empathy with the people who use them. This emphasizes the fact that great products all stem from a deep understanding of the user's needs, behaviors, and preferences, which can only be achieved through end user discovery, from communicating and engaging with them actively. If you don't know who you are creating the product for, how do you know what you are building is the product for them? So conducting those discoveries with the end user gives you valuable insights into your user's needs and preferences. It informs the product development process, ensuring that the product is tailored to meet the user's needs and deliver value. And what happens if you don't practice with empathy? You could have a diluted value proposition and you don't know to certain if you're solving a real need, and you could be overcomplicating the product with complex features that are hard to onboard and further retain users. Also, you'll have difficulty with scaling that product as well. And you think everything that was brought up was important to implement and overwhelm yourself with those requests from your customers. And ultimately, overloading the MVP with several complex features is a mistake you don't want to make. Just as Will mentioned yesterday, users don't understand complex functionality. And when you're packing it with several features, like we said yesterday, more options lead to more problems. So another pitfall of integrating large amount of features for an MVP is that when you're trying to accommodate everyone, you are serving no one. When we first start building something, we might want to cast a wider net, but when you deliver all these things, it makes the solution very difficult to use and onboard new users. Your end user won't recognize and think that this is something that's built specifically for them, and therefore they will not choose it over something else that may be out there. I understand that it's very difficult to convert someone who's used to a certain product to switch to a different solution, which is why the value piece becomes extremely important. People need to see that the value shine for them to make that decision. So let's put aside product for a second, because this relates to a human psychology that actually applies to every aspect in our lives. So for example, if we take a hair salon as an example, once you have found the one that you really like, how likely are you going to be on the hunt for another hair salon out there? There's so many of them. So the successful hair salon out there, they also market themselves for a particular niche. They might excel in hair coloring for blondes, or hair coloring for Asians, or haircuts for someone who has naturally curly hair. They have made this value proposition very clear. So one, to narrow down customer search in order for them to find them. And two, once a customer have experienced it, they know that this hair salon is the one they should go for. So the rule of thumb is tailor your product as much as you can for your identified end user, because when you're trying to appeal to everyone, you are speaking to no one. Does this make sense? Drop in the chat 1 for yes and 2 for no. 1, 1. Awesome. Okay. So value lies in finding and addressing a particular user needs. Just to summarize, at the end of the day, if your feature or product solves a very specific need and excels at doing that, guiding and facilitating your end user through a particular problem they have, that is your product market fit. Let's hear it from Don Norman, who is the director of the design lab and the industry expert who coined the term user experience. So he said, we must really focus on the activities that people are trying to carry out. We must also understand people's capabilities and their points of view and how to support them. So this statement emphasizes the importance of understanding your end user by looking particularly into understanding their abilities and capabilities and learning their current experience in order to build a valuable product. Just to show you some examples, this is a case study that was a project of mine from a few years back. We designed a mobile solution that helps facilitate and support the lives of single mothers from the help of their neighborhood. In the beginning of this project, our assumption was that single moms needed a platform where they can ask questions and receive mentoring from fellow single moms. Our initial idea was to create a platform, somewhat like a forum, like Reddit, where they can post questions and exchange resources. And then we did a discovery research where we interviewed 8 single moms in their 30s to 40s, and we found out that they really don't need another platform for them to connect with fellow single moms or to ask questions after all. And those already exist. So it doesn't give you a product market fit because it doesn't have any competitive advantage. What they really need is to just have someone who can lend them a helping hand when they need it, whether that's having someone to pick up their kid, daycare, or pick up groceries, or help fixing their light bulb. Those kind of daily chores are what they needed assistance the most. So we quickly pivot and change our design in that direction. We probably would have never known what they really need if we didn't talk to them and learn from their experiences. This is just one of the examples that end user insights is crucial to determine a product's direction. Another example, this is another project that I worked on a few years back. This is a microsite we built for A24 fans to view behind the scenes content from cast and crew. So A24 is a film manufacturing company. They produce a lot of indie films. And what we have found during discoveries with A24 fans is that A24 currently lacks engagement past the viewing stage of their films and TV shows. Although they have a platform where they are posting some monthly blogs, people don't really know it exists and people aren't engaging with it. Instead, they go to places like Twitter, Reddit, and YouTube to learn about the film. It was also made known to us that people want to analyze and dissect the films at A24, because generally those art house films, they're a little more difficult to digest and comprehend in nature. We know people want to see these contents, and what's a better way than having A24 to supply those behind the scenes analysis that only they have resource for. So to make it even easier for people to engage, the solution is built with a mobile-first approach, because from our studies, we have learned that most people read about films directly on their mobile device. By making it mobile first, we can also easily share and chat with users can also easily share and chat with their friends about it. So this just shows how doing those studies with end user really allow you to get insights on their behavior and their motivation that you'll only get from talking to them. Okay, so to give you another example of successful company out there, I'm sure we all know about Slack and probably uses Slack every day. Slack kept their user group niche when they first started. The founding team initially developed the product as an internal communication tool for their own team while working on different projects. So they pay very close attention to how their team use the tool, iterating based on their needs and pain points. They tested the MVP internally and refined extensively before they even launched publicly. They proceeded with a very user-focused approach, which allows Slack to create a product that addressed the real needs of the teams, leading them to rapid adoption and success. So the impact of the user-centered study they did was really profound. They became a leading communication platform for businesses, reaching millions of users and eventually being acquired by Salesforce for $27.7 billion. Another example I'll give you is Spotify. So Spotify continuously analyzes user behavior, such as listening habits, search patterns, and playlist creations to tailor the music experience to individual users. Before Spotify introduced the Discover Weekly feature, the company faced a common challenge in the music streaming industry, which is how to keep users engaged and encourage them to explore more music on the platform. What they have discovered while studying and analyzing their user behavior is that despite them having a vast library of songs, the volume of available music made it very difficult for a user to discover new tracks that match their taste. This often leads to the users listening to the same familiar songs and playlists over and over. But something they've also found during their discovery with the end user is that they notice people do want to discover new music, they just don't know where to start because there are too many options. So this discovery led them to design the feature Discover Weekly by leveraging their extensive catalog of music and creating personalized playlists that introduce listeners to music that they have not heard but are likely to enjoy. Within the first 10 weeks of this launch, Spotify attracted 40 million users, and that's about 50%, nearly 50% of Spotify's active users at the time. So from these examples, we learned that in order to create the most value for your product, you want to keep your end user needs and preferences at the forefront. So how might we empathize with our end user and find out what they really want? In order to find your end user avatar, there are a few factors you can consider. First, you can define their profile based on demographic or psychographic data. And second, you need to speak to this niche of people that fit in that end user profile. Notice I always say end user. So not your friends, not your team, not your family, unless they could be considered your end user. The problem with doing discoveries with these people is that they are part of your support network. So of course, they're going to celebrate and agree with whatever you're building and sharing with them. And the biggest problem is they might not necessarily have the same abilities, motivations, or activities that your potential user has. And third, talk to your end user about their current experiences and challenges. From this conversation, you'll be able to find some insights on what their net workflow looks like and what's currently lacking. This also goes into understanding what their motivations and goals are and what they value to be desirable. If you can address those through your solution better than what's currently available out there in the market, then you've got a winner. So now it's your time to put this into practice, and we're going to do a little workshop for you to define your end user avatar. I will be sharing a link with you in the chat. That will be your day 2 workbook. And I believe you also have that in the email, but let me just drop that in. So once you open up the workbook, you can scroll down to day 2. And there are a few questions I have prepared for you to answer. Is it working for both of you?
Yes, I chose enter.
Okay, perfect. So what I want you to do is to make it as detailed as possible, niche down as much as you can, and get into the nitty-gritty. And when you think you have the defined profile, just think again, and can you narrow it down even further? And we can even go through it one by one. So the first one I want you to answer, let's give it like 2-3 minutes. So demographic. So what are their age, gender, location, education background, and occupation? Okay, I see one response from Vinicius. Vinicius, would you like to come off mute and share a little bit about what you have for the first question?
Sorry, I'm gonna bus. Maybe the sound is
Oh,
not that
okay,
good,
no worries.
but it's okay. And basically, I would say it would be like a person in the start of the career. So that's why I put 20 to 40 years, because like usually people that are interested in starting to save and have to control a little bit more, I believe, and are starting to invest don't have that much information.
Mhm.
I do believe people that are already graduated because they already started working cannot be like earlier than that. Uh, and both women and men. I Yeah, something in those boundaries because like it needs to be someone that is in North America. I think that's going to be the initial market. And is worried about like managing daily stressful things. Yep. Like daily financial decisions and so on. They need to control tighter than other people.
Great, yeah, perfect. This is a great start. Man, do you have a response you'd like to share with us for demographic?
Yeah, absolutely. For demographics, because my podcast is called Survive to Thrive and it's focusing on students. So the
Mhm.
idea, so the demographic will be 18 to 24, international
Mhm.
students,
Mhm.
domestic students, recent
Mhm.
graduates, vocational trainees in Vancouver at the moment, just because the field is more local. And
Mhm.
their occupation, it would be all over the place. So it's hard for me to narrow it down, but mostly students.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, that's a great start as well. I think I like how you have niched it down to just the Vancouver area, like starting small. Yeah, great. Okay, so what about psychographic? So what are their interests, value, motivations, and behavior? So feel free
Or,
to also, oh, sorry,
sorry,
go ahead.
my bad. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay. For psychographic, their main motivation would be to get a job,
Mhm.
to personal development, and to make
Mhm.
connections.
I see. So to make connection would be perhaps the like one of their behavior as well, like what they have been actively doing.
Right.
Great.
On my side, I would say people that actually are currently worrying about their finances in like the future. I would say like people that need to think about the like when the values are basically people that like do diligence with their finances. And yeah, I don't think I'm gonna teach them a lot. It's
Mhm.
more like using the tool to actually get better. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Motivation,
Sorry, Vinicius. It has been a little difficult to
everybody
hear
is
you.
like pure financial motivation
Mhm.
and behavior. Okay, like motivations, I think it's like saving, and behavior is someone that's already working on starting career, something like that. I don't know.
Mm.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, sorry, Vinicius. It was there. I think there was some audio issue in the middle, but we can definitely unpack more about this later on, in our next section together. And what do they consider important and desirable? So feel free to spend a few minutes to think about this, and then when you are ready, feel free to come off mute and just share.
For important and desirable, looking at it from different perspectives of, let's say, international students, for example, they would want more connections because they're new to the country. They would want support in that sense. They are probably looking for a job, and which it goes back to connections. And yes, so that's what I'd land upon. Yeah.
Great, yeah. So they really value, for them, what would they consider important is the connections they can make.
That's correct. Thank you.
And then, great. And then Vinicius wrote, important to them would be have long-term savings and control well finances. Awesome. Okay, so the last part, I think this is also very important to consider when you are building a product or building an experience, is to understand what their current experiences and processes. Because when we think about this, we will start noticing some of the gaps in their current experience, and that could be the competitive advantage that you deliver or you bring through whatever you're building.
Could you clarify a little bit more about processes?
Yeah. So processes would be like what are they currently doing? So for your example, you're running a podcast for international students, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so what are their, and then I guess the end goal for them is to find a job. That's what you have identified.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the process would be, what are they currently doing for them to get there? For them to get from point A to point B, and the different activities that's involved for them to, when they're working towards their goal. So it could be like, so that could be listening to your podcast, or they could be doing job boards, those kind of stuff. So that's what I meant by processes. So basically the kind of activities they are engaged in for them to get from point A to point B.
Got it. Thank you so much. That
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm sending to the chat because of the noise, but will be there.
Pardon?
Just saying, I'm sending my messages through the chat, my answer, because I know the noise around is not that good.
No worries. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, thanks for dropping in the chat. I can read that out for you. So desirable have a budget within their control without sharing too much data. Awesome. And so their current experience would be have a hard and struggling time with personal budget with current open information, needing more details and insights to better manage. And then the current process is making budget by hand. So sounds like quite a manual process for them right now. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Manon, do you have anything you would like to share with us?
Is it for the previous question, current experiences?
Yeah, current experience and process.
Right. As far as experience is concerned, I'm sure a lot of them are attending networking events at their post-secondary institutions, or just getting involved by volunteering at the moment.
Yeah.
And processes would be they're on LinkedIn, messaging recruiters or anybody who's hiring, and then that way they're trying to build those connections.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
And what you said about job board is also true.
So what is your podcast mainly sharing?
Right. So I'm interviewing experts from different industries. So that could be marketing, that could be EV technology and stuff like that. And then through those podcasts, number one would be sharing insights and how those industries work. So for example, if you wanted to learn more about electronic vehicles and wanted to start your own gigafactory, just like Elon Musk did. So I interviewed someone who has a gigafactory. And then at the end, I asked him to kind of put out their socials to figure out if someone like yourself would like to connect with them, how would they do that? So they would say, this is my email, this is my LinkedIn, this is where I want you to connect.
Oh, okay. I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you have a particular niche of topic that you discuss, or?
Pretty broad at the moment, mostly focusing on what students want to know about. So I have a focus group and I figure out what questions they want to know about and then simply ask them. But it's pretty broad at the moment, definitely.
Okay, I see. That makes sense. Awesome. All right, so I will move on to the next slide. Yeah, so speaking with your end user, so now that you have identified those profiles of who your potential end user could be, you might wonder, how do you actually speak to them? And this is very important. So how many of you, well, it's just, I think Vinish is joining us in a second, but how many, have you asked this question before when speaking to your possible end user? Do you like this idea, or do you like this app? Or do you find this function useful? Is the feature easy to use and navigate? And do you see yourself using this? So put in 1 for yes and 2 for no. 1. Awesome. Okay, so these questions are what we call the closed-ended questions, which I'll unpack further on the next slide. There is absolutely no issue. A second. Yeah. Okay. There's absolutely no issue with using some closed-ended questions. 1 second. Okay, no worries, Vinicius. So basically what we talked about earlier, you only missed 1 slide. So basically, let me also ask you the same question. Have you asked these questions before when speaking to your possible end user? Do you like this idea, or do you like this app, or do you find this function useful? Is the feature easy to use and navigate? And do you see yourself using this? Put in
Never.
1 for yeah. Never? Okay. Yeah. Good. So actually, there is absolutely no issue with using those close-ended questions sparingly when you talk to your end user, especially if you're conducting, for example, usability testing. These questions give you some clarification and metrics to measure quantifiably. However, they might not always give you the most valuable insights. If an interviewer were to ask only close-ended questions, the conversation would be quite surface level. They might not learn important things that they didn't think to ask, because close-ended questions eliminate surprises. What you expect is what you get. So when you ask close-ended questions, you're most likely only getting yes or no responses, and it doesn't give you any surprising responses that you might not expect. So the reason why we only want to use leading close-ended questions sparingly can be traced to 2 particular reasons. First, humans have a tendency to be liked. Everyone wants to be liked, especially the first impression is something that's very important to us, and we aren't likely to critique your product from the get-go, especially face-to-face. When they're asked those close-ended questions, they're likely to respond how the question prompts them to. And second, when we are being interviewed or tested, we worry about being judged. This is something that's innate to our nature and is in our subconscious. When we're asked close-ended yes or no questions, our initial reaction is probably going to respond positively because we don't want to be perceived as an outlier. So that you don't just hear it from me. Maria, the director of research at Nielsen Norman Group, highlighted the difference between an open-ended and a closed-ended question. She said, open-ended question results in deeper insights. Closed-ended question provide clarification and detail, but no unexpected insights. With a closed-ended question, you are likely to get a yes or no response, which does not give you much valuable insights as to why they think a certain way. They also only give you expected response. So if you miss to ask something, you never know what might be a possibility, which may turn out your product development, which may turn your product development process into an interesting direction. So just to illustrate these points, you see in the graph here that open-ended question can prompt more interesting directions of your product potential. You uncover your end user's motivation for the things that you may have missed to ask. On the other hand, there is a high possibility that with the closed-ended question you ask, you may inevitably prime the people you talk to volunteer only specific information. As you see in the chart, that closed-ended question guides to responses A, B, and C. So you don't really get the nuances of what it could be outside of those 3 directions. So what I want you to start practicing is leading with open-ended question when you speak to your end user. Favor asking the how and the what over starting the question with do or did. So for example, instead of asking, was it what you expected? Did you expect that? Those kind of questions, you see how it only leads to a yes or no response. Try asking, what did you expect? And how was it different from what you expected? So now the user will be primed to answer, something that's more in line with their experience. That's not just answering yes or no. Okay, does this make sense? Put 1 for yes and 2 for no in the chat. 1. Great. Awesome. Okay, so this leads us to our next workshop exercise. This time I want you to think of an area in your product that you would like to get feedback on and write that down. And put that in the chat when you're done. So it could be your product or your idea that you have. What would you like to get feedback on from your current user? So the differentiation factor, privacy of data, is it making sense? Vinisha, would you like to clarify a little bit on the differentiation factor? But yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I do believe it's too close, but like I need to find an open question to validate the value. I think the customer would be better.
The privacy of data. Is it making sense? So what you mean by that is it asking your potential or end user, do they understand how their data is being used? Or like their privacy related to the data being collected?
Exactly. Basically,
Is that
are you aware when you use a tool, it can be used for things you are not expecting, and here it can be like transparent and clear of how everything goes, and you control it. Something like that. Does this make sense as a value?
Okay. Can you think of a way of how you can frame this question using an open-ended format? So starting the question with how or the what. Okay, as you think about it, we can move on to Manon's and then come back to yours later. Podcast length, quality of the question, and areas of improvement. So this will be an area that you want to get feedback on for your podcast.
Right. So I definitely ask about what's the ideal podcast length and how engaged do they feel. The second question would be, right, so going back to the engagement piece, is how's the quality of the questions? And do they feel like their questions are being answered? And lastly, it'd be what other resources I can provide to actually make it worth their time.
Have you asked these questions or have you gathered any feedback on any of those areas yet?
Not the way that I would like to. I've asked a couple people, but it's going back to the support group. Like they're happy with what you're doing, but I haven't been able to actually look at who's watching and ask them directly, if that makes sense. Someone who's unknown to me.
Oh, I see. Okay, that makes sense. So you have asked, but they are your listeners or they're just people in your network, your support
Listeners.
group. Okay, they are listeners.
Yes, they are listeners, but also people in my support group, so they're biased towards me.
I see. Okay. Yeah. I think would be I'm just trying to think. Yeah, so in terms of when you ask them, I guess your listeners these questions, we can revisit like the gathering anonymous surveys kind of thing after this. But for your listeners that you have asked these questions on, how have you been framing those questions to them?
In the same way that I asked here, which is trying to make it open-ended while also really figuring out what is that they're looking for. So, yeah.
I see. Yeah, I learned something interesting lately. So if you want to ask people about, like, say, for example, the podcast length, the ideal podcast length, I'll give you two examples. So one of them could be asking them, what is the ideal length you would listen to a podcast? From this, you might have people to answer in the way that that's like, oh, I want to spend maybe 20 minutes to listen to a podcast. If you ask this way, people will give you an answer, but sometimes those answers are not completely accurate either, because, say, for example, if they were asked like how long they would spend listening to a podcast, they could be answering from like an ideal scenario, but sometimes an ideal scenario is not the realistic scenario. So another way of asking could also be, how often in the last 2 weeks have you spent, how much time have you spent listening to a podcast? And then if you ask them, if you give them a specific time frame of, like, say in this example will be like how often or how frequent in the last 2 weeks. So the last 2 weeks is pretty recent. And then in this way, you also learn about their current experiences of how much time they actually listen to a podcast.
I like that. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like the quality of the question can also be approached the same way. So if we use the how and what framework, it will probably be what kind of content do you want to listen to on the podcast? And then another way of asking could also be, what kind of questions have you paid the most attention to, or have you been searching for through podcast? So one of them would be more also like their wish list, but another one would be more in line with their current experience. And I think there's a difference between like a wish list item and a current experience, because it gives you two different insights as to what they wish versus what's currently lacking.
I like that. Thanks, Peggy.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so Vinicius wrote, what third-party companies absorb of your financial data when you budget with current apps? Okay, so I think for this to gather, to frame this in a how and why framework, this is using a what. So yeah, so I think this does give you some insight as to what third-party companies that that they're currently using, that they know about, is using their data when they're engaging or interacting with a budget app. And then another way, or another question you could also ask could be like, what do you know about the financial apps that are currently collecting your financial data when you're interacting with it? Or how do you think the financial apps are utilizing your data? So this also allows your participants, or whoever you interview, to kind of unpack a little bit of what they know, what they're aware of how their current experience is, how their current journey, like how their data is being used right now. And that also gives you the insights of how much do your end user really knows about the data privacy aspect. Okay, so we have 10 minutes left. Let me see. Oh, okay, but we are pretty much wrapping up for day 2. Okay, so for day 2 highlights, before I reveal the highlights, I want to hear from you what your biggest takeaways are from today's workshop. So drop in the chat of what is your biggest takeaway. How to ask better open-ended questions. Yes. Ask open-ended questions. Yes. Great. Yeah, the main difference between asking open-ended question versus closed-ended is that when you're trying to improve something, you want to get the most insights that you can get, and those usually come from qualitative methods. So asking those questions in an interview format and then try to keep it as open-ended as you can. That's when you really get those unexpected responses that you might not even know that you needed. And that's how you can take any idea or product to an interesting turn. And accommodation equals serving no one. Yeah. So yeah, when you're accommodating to everyone, that's basically serving no one. Great, I really love these. Okay, so let me reveal day 2 highlights from my end. So we spoke about how to find the value, and you can only really understand the value you can provide when you have a clear understanding of your end user in mind. You need to be constantly in conversation with them, learning what they need and what they want to achieve. When you lead with a user-centered mindset and approach, you would identify the right value proposition for your end user. And yeah, appealing to everyone is appealing to no one. So you want to find your niche. And when speaking to your end user, always lead with open-ended questions. So these are the highlights I have for day 2. And yeah, so thank you so much. Thank you both for tuning in today. There is a VIP session happening right after this finishes, joined yesterday. So I'll see you there. And then, yeah, so in the VIP session, we'll also unpack a little bit more about today's session. And for day 2, I have additional workshop and exercises. We can unpack more on best practices when it comes to how to empathize with your end user, what are some of the frameworks that you can utilize. So if you're interested, let me drop a link in the chat. And okay. Okay. And tomorrow on day 3, we will talk about we'll unpack more how we can design a solution that easily get your user to onboard and use. So we'll talk about the design framework and how to simplify the steps for your user to get from point A to point B. So that's what we'll talk about tomorrow. Otherwise, thank you both so much. And yeah, see you.
Maggie, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I'm just curious to know, when you and Gabrielle were coming with this 5-day how to build your MVP program course, I was just wondering, did you feel like, well, there are so many other courses online